Long before capes and castles, the night had a different vocabulary. In the lands where rivers braided through the dark, people believed the world did not end at the grave. It thinned. Breath could be stolen. Warmth could be siphoned. A body might lie still while something hungry wore its shape. No one called these things vampires yet, but the fear already had teeth. Begin in the dust of old cities, where clay tablets remember more than living mouths do. There, the dead who would not settle were said to wander like heat on stone. They slipped through doorways, pressed on sleeping chests, leaned over cradles, and drank the breath that children didn't know they were guarding. They were not a single monster with a single name. They were a pattern. Breath taken, warmth gone. A thin place where the living and the dead met like two sides of a door. Stories spread the way seeds do, catching on trade routes, lodging in memory, sprouting in new soil. In one place, a night thing stole life from babies and mothers, a shape with a woman's hair and a predator's appetite. The kind of being you protect against, with charms on doorframes and vigilance at the bedside. In another, restless spirits drifted like smoke, pulling at the threads that tied body to warmth, insisting that death did not mean silence. The details changed with the language. The fear did not. Across the sea, in lands that built theaters and told stories under open sky, night creatures learned new names. A Lamia, who had once been a woman, became a figure who feasted on the living. A shapeshifter with bright eyes haunted crossroads and thresholds where a traveler's courage thins. Another creature, a bird by day, a terror by night, was said to land where roofs met sky, waiting for a house to let down its guard. The lesson was not subtle. The dark is a place where rules falter and life leaks away. People defended themselves with what they had: amulets, prayers, knives of iron slipped under pillows, nails hammered into lintels. The line between medicine and magic was not a line at all. You kept rosemary for smell and for spirits. You washed hands for cleanliness and to shake off bad luck. If a child fell pale and listless after a fever, if a mother sat hollow-eyed and slow as if some part of her had been drunk out of her, the word for what had happened depended on the story your grandmother kept close. Other tales spoke of a woman made of refusal, a figure who would not accept the boundaries expected of her and was therefore cast outside them. She hunted in the places society marked as dangerous, at night, in the private world of the bed, at the threshold of birth and breath. Later cultures would look back and retrofit this figure into a gallery of blood drinkers. Whether that is fair to her first stories is its own argument. What matters here is the shape of the fear, something feminine, night-moving, and disobedient to the roles that kept life predictable. Farther east, in a world of monsoon forests and carved stone shrines, the dead were not always done with their bodies. Some spirits were said to take shelter in the newly dead, wearing the flesh like a borrowed coat. They could make a corpse sit up and speak in a clever voice, asking questions that tied knots in the mind. They could step out into the night in that same body, minting fresh dread with every footprint. These were not gentle ghosts. They did not flicker at the edge of the eye. They stayed, insisting that the boundary could be picked open like a lock. In another tradition that traveled with merchants and medicine, a corpse could become a puppet for breath that was not its own. It would hop, stiff-legged, through courtyards, a parody of life, its skin pale as pressed paper, its movements jittering between comical and terrible. This was a story about improper funerals and unquiet burials, about the duties of the living to shepherd the dead properly home. It was also a story about fear wearing a human face without the kindness that makes a face feel human. Listen closely and you will hear the same chords sounding under all these different songs. The first is the theft of essence, breath, blood, warmth, vitality, things that can vanish without a wound you can point to. The second is the danger of thresholds, doors and windows, beds and cradles, crossroads and borders, the liminal places where rules tangle. The third is the nearness of women's work, nursing, birthing, tending, and the dread that attends it, because in older worlds, life arrived and departed so often in the same rooms. What did people fear? They feared sudden death at night. They feared infants who failed to thrive and mothers who bled or faded after childbirth. They feared the ways illness could drain a person until they seemed to be a shell around a thirst they did not own. They feared hunger in all its disguises, from famine to grief, and so they told stories in which hunger had a face. This is not to say that our ancestors lacked reason. They made careful lists of symptoms. They noticed what worked. Garlic was not only a charm against spirits, it was also food that kept and medicine that cleansed. Smoke was not only a purifier of bad air, it chased insects and made meat last. But when the night presses its hand on your chest and you cannot breathe, it is hard to remember that a body sometimes forgets its own pathways. It is easier to imagine a visitor. Across centuries, a certain idea begins to tighten. The hunger is not vague anymore. It chooses a fuel, not just breath, but blood, not just warmth, but the very fluid people call life. If life is a fire, blood is the oil that feeds it. Lose too much, and the lamp gutters. And once you frame the body as a vessel of liquid vitality, 1,000 things begin to look like theft, sickness, bruising, pallor, the way grief leaves faces gray. Some stories make the hunger seductive. A handsome stranger walks out of the dark. He is polite, a gentleman, refined, and slowly, so slowly, those around him pale and weaken, as if they have given away something they could not afford to lose. Other stories keep the hunger repellent. A corpse rises plump and ruddy, mouth wet with what it should not have, belly distended with gases that make it groan when moved. In both visions, something that should be still is moving according to its own appetite. But we are not there yet. We are still in the long twilight before the vampire acquires a uniform. The words change with the geography. Night hag, life drinker, corpse rider, strix lamia, restless dead. The acts remain familiar, stealing breath, stealing blood, returning from the grave, breaking the sanctity of the home, smudging the line between a visitor and a violation. The best stories endure because they describe a problem, even when the names are wrong. Why do these tales look alike, even when the people telling them have never met? Because bodies are bodies, because infants struggle to breathe and look suddenly still, because nights are long and uncontrollable, because grief needs a culprit, because in communities where life is close to the bone, death is not a mystery to be admired but a neighbor who overstays. And because the human brain has always preferred a thief you can picture to a failure with no face. Let us hold one image a little longer. A mother sitting at the foot of a bed, one hand on a cradle rope, eyes closed. The house is quiet except for the sound of a small person breathing in a high, fast rhythm. Outside, dogs argue with the night. The mother's head nods, the cradle slows. A shadow deepens in the corner where two walls meet. The baby's breath hitches. There is no monster standing there, not in the way a story might stage it. There is only the ancient fear that something wants what you love and will come for it when you are too tired to watch. This is the climate in which vampire stories grow. A weather of dread, a forecast of loss. Move forward and the stories concentrate. They explain more and frighten more efficiently. A spirit that once worried at breath now seeks blood. A corpse that once haunted thresholds now knocks on windows and asks to be let in. People become scientists of fear. They make charts and rules. They say, some creatures cannot cross running water. Some cannot enter without invitation. Some recoil from certain smells and metals. You could call this superstition. You could also call it an attempt at control in a world that makes control a rumor. You may notice another pattern. These stories gather around times of crisis, war, plague, famine, the sudden arrival of strangers, or the slow pressure of a new religion rearranging old customs. When communities are stretched, they tell stories that explain why the world feels emptied of safety. A rumor about a blood drinker does not just describe the night. It gives people a task: guard doors, watch windows, sit vigil, carry iron, whisper the right words, do not fall asleep. A task is a kind of hope. Occasionally, the stories accuse a particular person: a neighbor who lives alone, a woman who does not marry, a man whose withered arm makes children point and adults look away, a family that prospered while others starved. A midwife who knows more about blood than seems comfortable. Accusations protect the accusers from randomness. If suffering has a human cause, then the world is not a storm, it is a court case. Someone can be punished, balance can be restored. And yet, alongside these sharp, local stories, a grander figure begins to coalesce. Less rumor, more archetype. He wears a title, a ring, a suit that looks expensive, even if it is centuries out of date. He is disciplined, patient, and terrifying in his calm. He is the hunger of a system, not just of a stomach. He will arrive later, carrying the parts of all these early tales, like bones under a fine coat. He is not our subject tonight, but you can feel him assembling in the background whenever an old story mentions a visitor with polite teeth. For now, let us keep our attention on the prehistory of a myth. The first vampires were not counts. They were household worries, medical mysteries, the echo of a sob in a room where candles burned too low. They were bad sleep shaped into a person. They were grief wearing a mouth. This matters because when later centuries begin to keep better records, when soldiers write reports and doctors publish pamphlets, the old fears do not vanish. They harden. They are given paperwork and signatures. A village that once relied on charms will soon rely on exhumations. The language will grow clinical and brutal at the same time. And a word that once lived only in whispers will find its way onto official pages. That is where we go next. But before we leave this twilight, hold the keys we have gathered. First, vampires begin as explanations for intimate losses: breath, blood, warmth, vitality. Second, they guard thresholds and break them, teaching us to lock doors and draw curtains and watch the corner of the room that stays darker than it should. Third, they carry our anxieties about women's bodies, about childbirth, about sex and refusal and power, because all those things are tangled up with life and its upkeep. Fourth, they mirror the crises of their time: war, plague, hunger. When the lights of empires shift and armies camp in foreign valleys, when diseases arrive along the same roads as stories, the vampire will become a creature with dates and names attached. He will be mentioned in the same breath as villages and officers and graves and the forensic signs of death mistaken for life. He will step out of the fog of folklore and into the cold air of inquiry. Officials will take statements. Grave diggers will open soil that should have been left to its work. The fear that once lived in nurseries will move to cemeteries. That is where we are going. For now, when you blow out the candle and feel the room grow larger, remember that even the grandest monsters begin in small rooms with ordinary worries. The first blood drinkers did not wear opera capes. They were the explanation someone reached for when love and fear met at midnight. In a moment, we will climb a different hill, to a winter cemetery where soldiers with notebooks stand over a grave that refuses to behave. The word they will use for what they fear is new to them, but you will recognize its face. You have seen it around the cradle, at the window, in the breath that hitches in your sleep. We leave the ancient night for a more recent one, early modern Europe, where officials will open coffins and swear the bodies inside look too alive, where villages will argue with doctors, pamphlets will travel faster than facts, and the vampire will stop being a rumor and become an investigation.